Hi guys, welcome to another video. This one is to do with adding a third-party library to your Visual Studio solution. So for this one I'm going to be using WPF, which we're all familiar with, so I better get started and do a new project, WPF, and I'm going to call this one Metro Demo. Some of you may recall Metro was actually the name given to the new look, visual style that was applied to Windows 8. Microsoft now call it Modern. But whatever name you use, it's basically the same thing. It's a new type of skin or appearance to all your controls and the way things interact. So we're going to create a standard WPF application. We're going to use this third-party library which gives our application a Metro style look and feel. And it's pretty cool when you see it. Okay, so I've got a new WPF project. What I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to actually create a grid row. So I'll click towards the bottom there. That's created two row definitions, and I'm just going to set the bottom row to an arbitrary height of 50 pixels. Now I'm going to add a button into the bottom row, and I can change some of the properties of this just by using the properties controls over here, but what I'm going to do instead in this particular example is use the XAML code and edit it directly. So what I want to change? Well, let's start by changing horizontal alignment from left to right, and let's change the vertical alignment from top to bottom, and finally let's change that margin to 10 pixels all round, and that's just going to give us a very nice little button there. I'm also going to change its name from button 1 to button close. Okay, that's the first control done. Next one I want to use is one we haven't talked about before, which is the tab control. So that's over here in my toolbox. I'm going to click on that and drag that into grid row 0. That's the top row in the grid. There it is there. Again, I'm going to go in the XAML just to make some changes. I'm going to change the horizontal alignment from left to stretch, and similarly the vertical alignment I'm going to change from top to stretch. I'm going to get rid of the arbitrary sizes. So at the moment it's got a height of 100, so I'm going to delete that, and I'm also going to delete its width. That'll let the control take up as much space as it can on the first row, but the problem is, or grid row 0 I should say, but the problem is that my margin's pushing it out a little bit, so I need to adjust that as well, and I'll make that a uniform 15. So I'll leave it a white space around the tab control so we can see it clearly. Okay. So at this point I've got a tab control, I've got a button. I want to add a couple more tabs to the tab control itself. So while I've got that tab control selected, I'm going to go across in this time to the properties window, select the items, and click on add twice, which will add two more tab items to my tab control. Now I'll need to name them. So I'm just going to stick with the original naming and just call this one tab item 2, select the last one and call it tab item 3. Okay, that's all I need to do inside this editor, so I'll say OK. Now I've created a tab control with 3 tabs. Alright, so what are we going to do with these tabs? Well, on the first one I'm going to add a list box. So again, I'll drag that in there. I'll just size it manually for this example. That's list box, but of course there's nothing in it, so it's going to be a bit hard to see what effect our third-party library is going to do, so I need to add some list box items. And again, while the list box is selected, I'm going to go across to my properties, and there is an items property, and I'm going to add 3 list box items. And each one of these, I'll give it a name in its title, in its content, so we can see it. So I'll call it list item 1. List item 2. And list item 3. Okay, that's again all I need to do for the editor for the list box, so I'll OK that. And now we can see that we've got 3 items that we can look at. That's the first tab done. First tab item done. So now I'm going to move to tab item 2. And I'm going to add some items in here. Now, the challenge is at the moment is that the tab item is listed there, but it's got a closed tab. And what I'm going to find is if I try and drag 2 controls in there, it's not going to work because the tab item at the moment has been set up to only accept 1 item, which is frankly pretty useless. So I'm not quite sure why it defaults like that. So what I need to do is make it look similar to the code that Visual Studio created for us for the first tab item. And what we can see is the tab item has an opening line there, and then it has a closing one there, and then they're using a grid control which is holding whatever else you want to put in there. That's kind of what I'm after. So for tab item 2, I'm going to get rid of the shortcut for the closing and put in the full version of it, like so. And I'm also going to add a grid, because a grid can hold more than 1 control. That's why I'm using that. I'm going to go ahead and do that for tab item 3 while I'm at it. Great. Now I can get back to business. So I'm going to select tab item 2, grid, there we go, and I'm going to add 2 controls. So I'm going to be using the radio buttons for this one. There's radio button 1, and there's the second radio button. Notice that if we look at the XAML, you notice that they've appeared inside the grid for tab item 2, which is what I wanted. Now let's go down and select the grid for tab item 3. And for this one, I'm going to use a slider. So I just need to go and find it. There it is. I'll put a slider control, make it a bit bigger perhaps so it's easier to see. There we go. Okay, so that's all my controls done. I might just be really tidy on this one and change the title of the window as well to Metro Demo. And save my project at this point, just in case we make some mistakes when we add the third-party library. So that's a standard WPF application at the moment. I haven't done anything fancy. I've just simply laid out the controls the way I want to see them. I'm going to press F5 now just to check it, make sure it runs, and to get an idea what it will look like just if you're using the standard WPF controls. So I'm on tab item 1, here's my list box. Tab item 2, there's my radio buttons. Tab item 3, there's my slider. And of course I've got a button here to close, which I forgot to name. And I also haven't got anything happening with it yet, which is a bit silly. So let's fix that up before I go too much further. I'm going to call that close, and I'm going to add a click event of close. Let's see if it catches up with me. There we go. Okay, so because we've only got one window, and this is the main window, command, I'm effectively exiting the application or shutting the application down. I could also have used application.exit, but close will work fine for this example. Okay, so that's it for the coding. I'm going to go back to the UI view, the design view, and now I'm ready to add my third-party library. Now, as always with things to do with .NET and Visual Studio, there's more than one way to do this, but I'm going to show you what I think is probably the easiest way to get access to a whole heap of really good third-party libraries that you can use in your projects. So if you recall, I've mentioned before that we have a lot of libraries here inside references, and you can add other references there, like other third-party libraries. So you may have done a project like RFID fidgets, for example. We're using the fidget library to get access to their RFID reader. What we're going to do in this case is use a program called MAHAPPS, M-A-H-A-P-P-S. It's a third-party library, as I said, and it lets you reskin your components and controls to give them that sort of Metro look. To get them, you can go to their website and you can download their source code, compile it, and add the libraries manually, and that works fine. And maybe in another video I'll show you how to do that. But there's also a really cool utility you can use to get access to those binary files, the actual library files that you need. To do it, right-click on References, and then select the Manage NuGet Packages. This is going to bring up a dialog, and it's got really two purposes. The first purpose is to let you add third-party libraries. The second purpose is to allow you to also check for any updates to your third-party libraries. Now, if you don't tell it otherwise, it's just going to give you a list of some of the more popular third-party libraries that are available based on the number of downloads that they've had. And that's quite interesting. You can go have a look through that and find out what other things are out there. But since we know exactly what we're looking for, I'm going to click on the Search Online text box and type in MAR apps. And the first item that should come up on your search results is marapps.metro. That's the one we want. We don't want the resources one for now. We want the Metro one. So we go ahead and install that. And we're done. So, what did we get? Well, at the moment, not much. It doesn't look any different. If we go back and look at our main window, you'll see that the controls look exactly the same as they did before. We've got a little bit of tweaking we're going to do first. But you did get a new tab, and that tab actually has the documentation for the MAR apps library. And this documentation actually is quite good, so it is definitely worth having a bit of a read through it. I'm not going to demonstrate in this video all the features of MAR apps. There's more than what I'm going to show you. So it's definitely worth having a read and seeing what you can do with it. The other thing you would have noticed is we've also got a new reference in here called marapps.metro, which is telling us that it's added that third-party library, and we're good to go. Now, when I look at the documentation, I can leave it here and read it, or if you've got a dual screen or dual monitor set up like I've got, you might want to drag that out and put that onto your other monitor for reference. But whatever you do, you certainly want to keep a copy of that URL because it's going to come in handy in the future when you want to go back and look and see what else you can do with that library. So I've already added it onto my browser, which I've got on another screen that you can't see. So I've got it there for reference. Okay, let's go ahead and start using this library and see how it works. So I'm going to go to the UI. There's our XAML. Now I need to add a namespace to my project. There already are some namespaces there. If you go and look at the XAML, and I'll just zoom in a little bit so you can see it, you'll see these references starting with XMLNS. These are namespaces. And there is a separate namespace for MAR apps. You'll find what it is by looking at the documentation. So if I pop to the documentation here and scroll down a bit, we'll actually see, let's get there we go, that there's the reference to the namespace. So all I'm going to do is simply select that, copy it onto the clipboard, go back to my UI, create a new line and paste it in. Simple as that. So now XAML knows all about MAR apps and what to do with it. So the first thing I want to do is reskin the actual window so it looks more like a Windows 8 Metro style application. And whenever I want to use a MAR apps feature, I have to reference that namespace by using a name controls, because that's what it's been called. Now that's not arbitrary. You could call that anything you like. I could take that out and call it Dan if I want. But by default, if you've copied and pasted it in from the MAR apps documentation, it'll be called controls. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change that window. So I'm going to go to the first line where it references window. I'm going to put in the name of the namespace we're using, which is MAR apps. And now I can put in Metro window. And you'll see there's no errors on that. It actually accepted that fine. It is complaining that my closing tag isn't matching now. So I better go down and fix that up before I do anything else. So again, controls, Metro window. Now we've got rid of our errors. That looks fine, and if I try to run it, it would seem to be okay, but there is one other reference that we need to change, and that's actually in the code view. So I'm going to press F7. And when we look at the class file, that actually is our window, we'll see that references system window. Well, of course, we're not using window anymore, we're using Metro window. So I'm going to change that to Metro window. When I do that, I'm also going to get an error message because it doesn't understand what Metro window is. And that's because I have to add a using clause. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Now we've got that in there, error's gone away. Let's have a look now and see what our window looks like. I'll press F5 to run the application. There it is now. It's not yet complete. We can see definitely that the window's changed, but we can also see it's not particularly colourful. It's all black at the moment. And we also can see that our controls, like our tab control and our button, haven't changed at all. They're still looking the same that they would in a normal WPF application. So I'll stop the program now, and we'll go back into XAML, and we'll keep working on changing the appearance. Now we've looked after the window, we also now need to look about changing the appearance of the controls and also setting the colour scheme. Again, if I go to the MARApps documentation, it gives me a little code snippet that's going to help me to do that. And what it says is under the opening Metro window tag, you need to add the following. And what it gives you is a window resource, a resource dictionary, or several resource dictionaries actually, that affect how things will look. For example, they affect the colours, the fonts, the controls, and the various accent colours for your actual windows. Windows resources are a really great idea inside WPF. They essentially allow you to load in all these other resources and reference them directly. It's a subject in itself. I don't really want to go too far into it with this one because we're basically just looking at how to add and get this library working. But if you do a bit of research on it, you'll find some really cool features in there. But perhaps a quick and easy way to describe it is to think about like CSS is for a website, for example. You could use resources and resource dictionaries in the same way. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste that code again from the documentation into the XAML window, and I'm going to put that code after the opening and closing tag here, but before the grid, like so. Okay, now it's a straight copy and paste, I haven't done anything else to it, and immediately you would have noticed my controls have changed. They've now taken on a whole different look to what they had previously, which is great. Haven't done anything else, so let's press F5 and see what it looks like when we run it. And there you go. It's now been completely reskinned. Our tab control looks completely different. And if we look carefully, when I select these items now, they're not got a grey background. They've got a blue background, which is to match our Metro theme. Our tab controls look different. Our radio buttons have a slightly, well, a very subtle difference, but they are different. And our slider is different as well. Finally, our close button looks different. Now we've got capitalization for the button caption, and the highlight colors and the shape of the button is much different. We also can see that our minimize, maximize, and our close tags have all been changed as well, as has our title. And that's all just by adding that third-party library. Let me get that. Now there's lots of other things you can do. There's some subtle animation effects. You can add extra bits and pieces. What I'm going to do is add one more bit, which is straight out of their documentation as well, just to show you, which is adding some actual features up here in the title bar. So I'm going to stop my application by closing it. Go back to their documentation. We'll go down and have a look. And down in section 3.4, they've got a reference to Windows commands and the ability to actually customize your window. I'm going to use that feature, so I'm going to just simply copy and paste again what they've given us as a starting point at least. Go back to my XAML, go below the Windows Resources closing tag and before the grid, and paste that in. And for the most part, it seems to be fine. However, I'm going to get an error on a resource. It's looking for app bar cupcake, and it can't find it. And the reason why is because those resources are separate. They're not coming down as part of that MarApps Metro library. Actually, is a separate file that we'll need to get in order to access that app bar cupcake, which, by the way, in case you're wondering, is a little icon of a cupcake. So what I'm going to do now is add another third-party library that's going to give me access to that particular image. So I'm going to go back to my references, right-click and select Manage NuGet. Type in MarApps again. And this time, I'm going to select MarApps Metro or marapps.metro.resources. You can tell we've already got the first one because it's the green tick next to marapps.metro. So it's telling us we've already got that. We're selecting the second one down. So I'll click Install. It'll take a few moments. And if we have a look now, nothing's appeared in our references. However, we do have a new folder called Resources that wasn't there previously that has a file called icons.xaml, and that actually has the description for our cupcake. So that's good. So far, so good. But we need to make a change. Let me just switch this over here. We need to make a change to our resource dictionaries in order to tell it that we now have that extra file. So I'm just going to create a new line underneath the existing entries and say resource dictionary source. And then for the source, I'm going to say resources, which is the name of the folder, / icons.xaml, which is the name of the file. And then we'll close that. Okay. That's all I'm going to do. Let's press F5 now and see what happens. And now if we have a look, you can see that we have a settings button, a really cute cupcake, and it's got deploy cupcakes. So that's how you can create custom buttons and text inside or on top of your title bar if you'd like, which is a very Metro style convention. Now how would you get that, say, that settings button to actually work? Well, let's have a quick look at the code and see what we can find. When we copied and paste that code in, you'll see that we actually just created two buttons. First button is called Settings, and the second one, which is a bit fancier because it's got a stack panel, is setting up the text and the picture of our cupcake. So let's say I'd like to add a click event to the first one, the Settings one. I'm just going to select that line. I'm going to come into the Properties window here and I'm going to give it a name. I'll call it Button Settings. And then I'm just going to go to the Events tab and double click on the click. Now I'm in here, and of course I can put in there whatever I like. Now for this quick demo, I'm just going to do a message box. So hello from settings, and I'm going to do the same sort of idea for the second button. So back to the XAML, go down to the line that has the second button, and call that one button cupcake. Double click on it, or select the events tab if you haven't already, double click on the click event, and again let's just do a message box to see that that works. Okay, let's press F5. Here's my application running again. Let's try clicking on settings. There we go, there's our message box. Deploy cupcakes. There's our message box for that. Pretty cool. Now you would have noticed, of course, when I run those message boxes that they unfortunately do not have the new Metro look. So if you wanted these to match your new funky look that you've got for your main application, you have to create your own dialogues, which sounds a bit scary, but actually is not that hard at all. It's really just creating some new windows that look like dialogues with the Metro style attached to it. Now, I've really only just touched the surface of what Marx can do. It actually has a few more features in it, including a really cool panorama tool. So I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at their documentation and try it out for yourself and see how it works.